Welcome to BGV Talks. I'm your host, Shelly Bell, and today we are talking to Misha Nonoo, which I'm super hyped to talk to her, who makes some of the most beautiful clothing I've ever seen in a way that is both practical and high-end and fashionable, which I feel like is super hard to do.
Thank you.
So, welcome to BGV Talks. How are you?
I'm good. We are in California at the moment, and quarantine has been, it feels like it's gone on forever. I have a 4-month-old son, so I gave birth to him literally 8 days before we went into lockdown. So life is a little surreal right now, to be honest with you. But everything is great. Feel very grateful and very happy and healthy.
So talk to us a little bit about the story of becoming Misha Nonoo. So did you always want to be, did you like, when I grow up, I'm going to be a fashion designer? Like, was that your thing? Were you making things, growing up? Like, tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, first of all, Shelly, I'd like to thank you for what you said about, the clothing itself and how it's practical and fashionable. And, there's a lot of attention to detail, because it actually does take a lot to create a piece that has all of those different facets and elements to it. So I appreciate that. How did I become Misha Nonoo and the brand? Well, I would say that I'd always wanted to be a fashion designer. I was fascinated from a very young age about how women used clothes to either accentuate a certain aspect of themselves or to very cleverly mask certain areas of themselves that they didn't want to accentuate. And I grew up in the Middle East, actually. I grew up in Bahrain. My background is that my father is Iraqi Jewish and my mother is British. So I grew up in the Middle East, and being brought up there, I really saw culturally the difference between men and women in a very male-dominated world. So I think I was kind of fascinated by those nuances. And then when I was 10 years old, I moved to the UK, which of course was a whole different kettle of fish. I think I was always fascinated in fashion. I didn't know that I was going to be a fashion designer. I didn't know I was going to have my own brand. I didn't really know what any of that meant. But I'm an only child, and now having my first child myself, I think it really informs me a lot about myself and how being an only child makes you very self-sufficient, and you kind of look at the world through a slightly different lens than what I imagine it's like if you have siblings. So basically, when I was about 14 years old, I decided that I was going to have, some sort of fashion label. It's going to be clothing, something. And at that time in the UK, when you're 14, you're starting to think about what your classes are that you're going to take and specialize in from like 15 to 18. And I told my parents I wanted to work in fashion, blah, blah. And they said, and I wanted to go to design school. And they said, okay, well, if this is what you want to do, actually, it's probably smarter that you go to business school. In the long term, like in the long run, when you're 18, 19, think about going to college. That's, business focused. And that kind of blew my mind slightly. And I thought, well, that's not at all what I said. You're not listening to me. You're not hearing me. And ultimately, I followed their advice, and it ended up being some of the best advice I could have got, because now running a business, I am extremely creative in how I run my business, and we're very innovative in some of the things that we do, whether it's from social media plays that we've made to how we manufacture. But I think ultimately it's very important when you're already strong in a certain realm like design or creation to then really challenge yourself and learn about the business side, which is what I ultimately did. So I went to school for that. Then I moved to New York City. I apprenticed for a couple of years in a small fashion house. The garment district was still much more of a thriving place than it is today, unfortunately. It has really diminished in size. But I learned hands-on about manufacturing, about how to make a garment, all of that. And then I started my own label, and that was coming up to 10 years ago now.
Wow. Well, congratulations on a new baby.
Thank
and congratulations on 10 years.
Thank you.
Really love the idea of like creatives going to business school, because I think that's the part that we see where it's like, I'm super creative and I'm designing this thing. It's like, but I don't know the first thing about business, right?
Totally.
We're always trying to like make sure that people get those skills, understand business modeling, and understand how to take something you're really great at and feel really good about. And, you know, I think that's the interesting part about like the way society is built around like what you end up doing
Yep.
is that it doesn't feel like a lot of people are doing things they feel really great about,
Right.
and are feeling really like, I feel like everybody's a creative in some sense, like, you know, looking at someone who's a surgeon and like the creativity that you need to get through certain things,
Absolutely.
it's all creativity.
Yep.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Creativity exists in many different realms.
For sure.
Yeah.
So along your journey, have you had to face any obstacles around just like being a woman, or just in general? Because you mentioned being, you know, living in a male dominant society.
Yeah.
And by the way, I spent some time in Oman last year.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you kind of, Oman is a beautiful place. It really is stunning. I mean, it's gorgeous, but and more of a tourism place than Bahrain.
Yeah.
It was more of a center of commerce when I lived there. Now Dubai has kind of eclipsed it in that realm. Have I had challenges being women? Absolutely. I think every day. There are small things that we, you wouldn't necessarily ever dwell on, but there are small things that you're confronted with on a daily basis because you're a woman, or someone thinks that maybe they can take advantage because you might not. Traditionally women aren't as strong when it comes to finance, legal, things like that. That's more of like a male traditionally background.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there have been opportunities for people to diminish maybe what I might know in that realm, and take advantage of that and be like, oh, well, like, I'll do that for you. Don't worry. You don't even need to think about that. Like, don't worry, a pretty little head kind of thing. And you're like, well, actually, this is my business, and it's very important that I know this too, and that I'm fluent in it. So again, to that point of overcoming challenges, sometimes, and I think oftentimes actually, we don't like doing the things that we find most challenging. Anything that's easy, we're very happy to kind of check that box and say, yeah, I'll do that. But anything that's challenging tends to be something that we kind of procrastinate over, or, say, oh, I would rather not. But those areas of the business have been areas that I've really had to think through, because as a woman, I was not as strong at them. That wasn't really something that was my strength, or something that I really enjoyed doing, but it's been critical that I learned those aspects for the business.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I'm an engineer, and so I was reading about, because of the societal factors at play that are the things that are promoted to boys.
Yes.
So like video games, where they're much more masculine.
Yep.
Right? All of them, the colors, the look, the feel, all of it is, even if we're not talking about like guns and women in the games, just the look and feel of the games is more masculine,
totally.
according to what's being considered masculine. And so they found that girls were not wanting to do engineering after a while anymore, just because we hadn't been conditioned, right? So to your point about the finances and illegal, it's like the conditioning around where a boy goes, where a girl. It's like, oh, girls are better at English.
Oh yeah, of course.
Girls are better at math, and like I'm hoping that as we evolve, that will shift like tremendously.
I agree with you. I think it's really important. I think the only thing that we can really think about is how we nurture the younger generations, right? Whether you have children or you don't, whether you're just investing in people who are interns in your business, it's really not buying into those biases, not buying into those really deeply rooted societal patterns. As you say, boys are good at maths, boys are good at science, girls are good at drawing and poetry and English. And the minute that you empower a girl and say, oh my God, you're so good at maths, you see how that makes them feel very proud and want to invest more in that.
100%. 100%. I agree. So I want to talk a little bit about how you're innovative, because you talked about the attention to detail, which I love, and I love my shirt.
Thank you. So glad.
It's so good. And I noticed, when we were speaking with your staff, they talked about how you pivoted toward away from like the fast fashion and into doing sort of made to order. Mm-hmm. I would love to hear more about like where were you in the moment where you're like, we need to move in a different direction? Like, what was that thought process like? Because it's so hard for certain founders to pivot in that way. So where were your thoughts around that?
I think I had really come to just be very tired of the wholesale methodology. So before I pivoted to being direct to consumer, on demand, all of that. I was a traditional wholesale fashion brand, and I sold to major department stores. And this was, let's say, it was 5 years ago that I worked with department stores, and then 4 years ago that I pivoted. And 5 years ago, when I was working with department stores, you would have other brands around you, and every department store that you go to would have a similar footprint, and they would have similar brands, and they would have a similar buy from each of those brands. So everything that I looked at, wherever you went around the country, was always the same. And that kind of homogenized point of view, if it didn't work in one place, it didn't work anywhere. And that would just mean that your whole season was written off. And then even though these department stores had technically bought your collection, they'd then be like, well, we have a gross margin agreement, and, we have to go on sale after 10 weeks. 10 weeks is nothing. That's 2.5 months. And 10 weeks at full price when you are buying coats in August brings you to October, when in most of the country, you don't even need a coat in October still. So the whole model was so broken to me that the only way, I obviously wasn't going to be able to change the department stores because I wasn't a big enough fish to be able to have that leverage. But the only way that I was going to be able to do it was to just abandon that plan and go in a totally different direction. And that was when I decided to go direct to consumer, build up my own following, build up my own customer base, talk directly to them, and then not hold inventory and produce in a way that was eliminating waste. So the fashion industry is extremely wasteful, as you know, Shelley. Fast fashion is one thing, but even in designer labels, when you go to a department store at the end of the season and there's all that stuff on sale, after it hasn't been sold there, it then goes to the off-price world. When it hasn't been sold there, it then gets burnt or, because brands had to think about, not diminishing their brand value. And it really upset me to think that so many brands were just wasting not only the raw materials, but also the time and the labor spent in producing, in marketing, in shipping all of this product. And it just felt like consumption in the worst possible way to me.
Irresponsible.
So I started looking at it from a sustainable perspective, and I decided to produce on demand. So every time that orders come in, they are then produced and shipped to the customer within 7 to 10 business days. And that to me was incredibly important, that turnaround time, because I knew that our woman would wait. Like, if it's a perfect white shirt, you don't need it tomorrow, but you don't want it in a month's time. Right. You're bored by then. You kind of, 2 weeks is really your threshold for when you'll wait for something. So that kind of idea of delayed gratification was what I was looking at. And that was how we implemented the on-demand manufacturing process. And it was extremely complicated to begin with. But now it's something that I actually believe that we could roll out to other retailers, because I think that if it's worked for us, it could work for a lot of other people. And there's something about that I think would be amazing to share.
Yeah, and we would be saving the planet at the same time. So I love it.
Totally.
I think, so when you pivoted from doing the wholesale into doing the direct to consumer, did it feel like you were starting all over again? Like what was, because because you were starting to build your own individual, just as an individual brand to stand alone.
Totally.
Like, what were some of the things you had to think about, or like things you had to put in place, like processes, maybe hires you had to make, anything there to really just make that move from being wholesale to being a direct to consumer?
Honestly, it was quite dramatic. I had to change the whole team. And, there was this story that had been told over and over, that the reason that you would always pick working with a wholesaler over doing it on your own was because you would get marketing. A part of that was free marketing dollars. But funnily enough, when you start and do it out on your own, those people that had seen you in a department store, they don't really remember you. It's so cluttered, and it's not like there's a spotlight on you that people are like, oh, wow. So all of that was kind of a bit of a BS talk. And I was like, okay. It was starting out all over again. And now in hindsight, I wouldn't do it any other way. I probably just would have done it sooner.
Yeah, because I also think there is this idea that, oh, if you're going direct to consumer, that you need to get into wholesale so you can make more money. There's also this idea that like, oh, if you were in wholesale, you went direct to consumer, you couldn't cut it. You know,
Yeah,
like, there's all these attitudes out there
totally.
about that. You know, did you have to combat any of that, even if it's just internally within yourself, or within?
Yeah, I mean, I guess definitely you have those kind of negative talk conversations with yourself, 100%. I think that potentially people may have said that behind my back. No one said it to my face, but I think now people recognize that it was the right move. So I have to say that I feel quite fortunate in that I never worry about what other people think. I always focus on what I think is 100% right for myself and for my business. And, you know, whenever I have a blip in the road, I know that I have all the answers myself. I just sometimes have to find the right people to ask me the questions to bring out those answers.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was talking to one of our change agents yesterday. We were talking about this idea of taking advice, and that this idea of like, listen, you made this up. So really there is not but so much advice that someone can give you on it. You have to have complete confidence in yourself, know who you are, know what you want, and just move on it and be willing to learn as you go.
Totally.
Because, you know, for the most part, like, you made this up. I made this up. It's successful. It's great. Right? It's amazing. You know, helping lots of people, helping the environment. Like, you know, also providing a really great service and a really great product.
Yeah.
At the same time, you know, we figured it out. You figure it out. You keep figuring it out as you go. So
I think a lot of life is about iteration. And as you say, sticking with what works and having to drop, and those honest conversations with yourself, dropping what doesn't work. And, you know, I don't think that it's a bad thing to admit that something wasn't working. It's like now 5 years later, a lot of people are admitting that wholesale isn't working. I just happened to have that conversation earlier, and I had maybe a lower threshold for dealing with something for a long time that was not working.
Yeah, 100%. How do you keep balance, like, for yourself? Like, you know, a lot of people talk about self-care, and self-care is weird for me because I thrive off of what I do.
Right.
Like, I love the work that I do.
Right. Right. So you're really good at it. I mean, I think it's actually interesting that you asked me this right now, because it's something that I've definitely been thinking about a lot with having a new baby. And I think that ultimately having a schedule is extremely important to me personally. I think that balancing it is, self-care is important. Like for me, I really love to work out and things like that, but I really have to have a schedule so that I know when I have an hour for a workout or an hour to, you know, go grocery shopping or whatever it is. I think whatever it is that you need to do and whatever you take solace in, play with my, you know, 4-month-old, you have to have that kind of scheduled out for yourself. Otherwise, I get, if it's too chaotic, I don't really thrive well in that situation.
Yeah, 100%. So our final question is always, is there anything or any advice or thoughts or even quotes along your journey even that you would give to entrepreneurs out there who are, they've already started? I think this idea, I'm tired of people talking about launching. I'm like, if somebody gives one more 101 course, I'm going to scream. There's so many people who are already in
You're
business.
right.
What about them, right? Like, let's speak to them. So what would you give someone who's in business, they're figuring it out, they've maybe learned some lessons, but they still are looking for more guidance? Or what is some that you learned along your journey?
I think that, you know, tenacity is one of the most important things. I think that just when things are getting to be really good, this is particularly to this moment in time, right? Coronavirus, COVID, all of that. There's a lot of people who probably were doing really well, were on a great upwards trajectory, and either COVID has helped them or hindered them. And I think that you have to, number one, have faith. And, you know, faith comes in so many different shapes and sizes, whether that's, you know, spiritual belief or whether it's just having faith in yourself. You have to have faith, and then you also have to have tenacity. Things are not always going to go according to plan. And that's why it's good to not necessarily cling to one type of plan, and know that things, you need to iterate and things change. And the more fluid that you are and having an open mindset versus a fixed mindset, I think the more successful that you'll be.
100%. Thank you so much for joining us for BGV Talks. We really, really appreciate you.
Thank
Can't wait
you.
to go live with you later.
Me too. I'm so excited.
Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Shelley. Take care.
Right. Have a
Bye.
good Bye.
Bye.